Before we begin this journey inside the walls of the Vatican, I invite you to pause and tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? Your stories, like ours, are pieces of a greater tapestry. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, because tomorrow another extraordinary chapter awaits. A story of courage, loyalty, and quiet acts that echo louder than any words. Now step with us into a world where one small choice can change everything. What was hidden in the guard's uniform that changed the Pope's final farewell? The morning sun struggled to break through the heavy mist clinging to the ancient stones of Vatican City. It was a day wrapped in a solemn, almost reluctant light. In St. Peter's Square, tens of thousands gathered, their faces marked by grief and reverence, their bodies cloaked in black and purple fabrics that seemed to absorb the chill in the air. Today was not just a funeral. It was the burial of Pope Francis, a man who had touched countless lives with his humility and courage. And for the Swiss Guard, it was the most critical test of tradition and discipline in living memory. At the heart of the marble expanse, a single line of Swiss Guards stood like statues, their colorful uniforms, bold swirls of blue, red, and yellow, striking against the sea of mourning. Among them stood Lance Corporal Lucas Bowman, known not just for his towering height and iron discipline, but for his silent, almost invisible strength. For 14 years, Lucas had served without a single blemish on his record. Today, he intended to do no differently. Before the ceremony, within the cold stone walls of the barracks, Commandant Schmid had delivered one final address. His voice, rough yet steady, carried across the rows of young and seasoned guards alike. Today, you are not simply men. You are centuries of service made flesh. The world is watching. If even one guard moves out of turn, it will dishonor not only Pope Francis but the Church itself. The weight of that warning pressed heavy on every shoulder. No mistakes would be tolerated, no deviation excused. Lucas absorbed the command, like he had absorbed every order before, without question, without hesitation. His halberd rested firmly against his armored chest. His boots were planted immovably on the centuries-old stones. His gaze, steady as a northern star, fixed forward, without a flicker. Discipline was not merely expected here. It was demanded, a sacred language spoken through stillness and precision. When the organ began its mournful hymn, the world seemed to hush in a single breath. A river of white-robed altar boys, purple-clad bishops, and crimson-garbed cardinals flowed from the basilica, their steps measured, their faces grave. And finally, the simple cypress coffin emerged, carried by black-suited pallbearers under the heavy gaze of the faithful. Lucas felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the tightening he always felt at moments of great duty. His father's words echoed in his mind. Precision is respect, precision is love. And so he stood, motionless, composed, prepared to honor the tradition that had outlived kings and empires. Nothing, he told himself, not even grief, would crack the stone of his resolve. But hidden deep beneath his polished breastplate, close against his beating heart, was something else entirely. Something that would test the very meaning of duty. Before the day was done, beneath the armor, beneath the centuries of tradition, Lance Corporal Lucas Bowman carried a secret that not even his fellow guards suspected. Tucked carefully inside the inner pocket of his uniform was a letter, handwritten and sealed with the modest papal crest. It was not an official order, nor a message meant for the world. It was personal. A final whisper from Pope Francis himself, delivered through the trembling hands of Father Ventresca 2 nights before. As Lucas stood motionless in the biting chill of the square, the weight of the letter pressed against his heart. It was not heavy in mass, but in meaning. He could still hear the priest's frail voice that night beneath the shadows of St. Anne's Gate. When the moment comes, you will know. Trust your heart, not your training. Trust your heart. Words that clashed violently with everything Lucas had ever been taught. All around him, the slow march of ritual continued. The cypress coffin, plain and unadorned as the Pope had requested, inched forward under the careful grip of the pallbearers. The air was thick with incense and reverence. The great basilica loomed behind them like a silent witness. World leaders, cardinals and common pilgrims alike watched with held breath, expecting nothing but perfect, unbroken ceremony. Lucas's fingers tightened around the shaft of his halberd. A small, almost invisible tremor ran through his gloved hand. He could still walk away from this inner conflict. He could bury the letter deeper inside his jacket, pretend it didn't exist, fulfill his duty exactly as commanded. No one would know. No one would question. His life, pristine, orderly, impeccable, would march forward just as it always had. But deep inside, something shifted. Not loud like the blast of a trumpet, but quiet, certain, inevitable. It was the memory of another time. The crying, child lost in the crowd, the risk he had once taken, and the way Pope Francis had looked at him afterward. Not with reprimand, but with understanding. It was the memory of a hand on his shoulder and a voice telling him that obedience without compassion was just another form of blindness. The choir's voices swelled, pulling the world tighter into the moment. The coffin reached the foot of the basilica's steps. This was it, the point of no return. Lucas felt his breath catch in his chest. His mind screamed for discipline, for silence, for stillness. But the beat of his heart, steady and insistent, urged him otherwise. Somewhere far above the misty rooftops of Rome, the bells of St. Peter's tolled once more, slow, mournful, and eternal. And in that sound, Lucas made his choice. Lucas shifted his weight slightly, a movement so subtle it could have been mistaken for a breath of wind. Yet, in the strict choreography of the Swiss Guard, even that was dangerous. His eyes, locked forward like every other guard, saw nothing, but his heart, pounding beneath layers of polished armor, felt everything. The letter inside his jacket seemed to burn against his skin, its presence louder than the organ's mournful notes filling the square. The moment tightened around him like a noose. Every training session, every command, every warning echoed in his mind. Hold your ground, never move unless ordered. But another voice spoke louder now, the voice of a frail old man, smiling by a window, telling him that sometimes the holiest thing a man can do is move when he's told to stand still. Then it happened. Lucas's right boot shifted. The faint sound of leather scraping stone was almost lost in the music, but to the guards around him, it might as well have been thunder. His left foot followed, deliberate, heavy, a betrayal of centuries of tradition. In 3 long strides, he crossed the gap between the ranks and the coffin, each step slicing through the heavy silence like a blade. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Dignitaries whispered behind gloved hands. Somewhere, a camera's red light blinked faster, recording every forbidden moment. Still, Lucas moved with calm precision, as if his steps had been rehearsed 1,000 times. But they hadn't. This was pure instinct, pure faith. He halted directly before the coffin, the simple wooden box that cradled the earthly remains of the man who had taught him courage beyond obedience. For a heartbeat, he stood there, a single figure, framed against the vast marble backdrop. Before reaching into his jacket, the letter emerged, a pale square of folded parchment, trembling slightly between his gloved fingers. Without breaking posture, Lucas bent one knee, placing the letter gently atop the cypress coffin, just beneath the simple wooden crucifix. His hand lingered for the briefest moment, a private prayer sealed into that silent touch. Under his breath, he whispered words meant for no one but the man he was honoring. For your final journey. With all my heart. The square, so full of human breath and weight a moment ago, seemed to exhale. A great shared hush fell over the gathering. Lucas straightened, pivoted crisply on his heel, and marched 3 steps backward, restoring his place among the guards without a single further tremor. The breach had lasted only seconds, yet it felt like the earth itself had tilted. Lucas resumed his post, halberd upright, face unreadable, but something unbreakable had already shifted, not just within him, but within every soul who had witnessed what tradition could never fully contain, an act of loyalty deeper than the rules themselves. The funeral continued, but for Lucas Bowman, time no longer flowed in the same steady current. It had splintered the moment he placed the letter atop the Pope's coffin. As the final prayers echoed across St. Peter's Square, and the crowd began to dissolve like mist under the afternoon sun, Lucas knew his life as a Swiss guard had irrevocably changed. He did not flinch when the summons came. An officer, eyes grave, approached him quietly near the side corridor and handed him a signed, folded slip of paper. "Report immediately," it read, bearing the unmistakable seal of the Congregation for Divine Worship. Lucas offered no response. He simply nodded, adjusted his halberd against his shoulder, and made his way toward the administrative chambers buried deep inside Vatican walls. The hallway stretched long and cold. His polished boots tapped against the ancient stone with a rhythm that sounded almost too loud now. At the far end, a door stood half open, light spilling from within. Lucas paused for the briefest second, gathering not courage but peace, and stepped inside. 3 figures awaited him, seated behind. A modest oak table was Cardinal Favreau, the prefect. To his right, Commandant Schmid, face tightened like drawn leather. And to the left, Archbishop Tremblay, whose hands, folded neatly atop a leather dossier, betrayed no emotion. The door clicked shut behind Lucas with a soft finality. "Guard, Bowman," Cardinal Favreau began, his voice calm but heavy. "You are aware that your actions today deviated from established funeral protocol." "Yes, Your Eminence," Lucas replied, his voice steady, though his heart thundered against his ribs. Schmid leaned forward, his stare sharp as a blade. "Do you have any justification for breaking formation before the entire world's eyes?" Lucas reached into his breast pocket and carefully withdrew a copy of the letter. Not the original, which now rested forever with Francis, but a faithful transcription he had made 2 nights earlier. Wordlessly, he placed it on the table. Cardinal Favreau picked it up, adjusted his glasses, and read aloud. "If one man can carry love into tradition, then let him do so bravely." The room hung suspended in silence. Even Schmid's breath seemed to catch. Finally, Archbishop Tremblay spoke, his voice low. "These are the Holy Father's own words?" "They are, Your Excellency," Lucas confirmed. Cardinal Favreau set the letter down gently. He studied Lucas, not as an officer studies a subordinate, but as a man weighs the soul of another. "You understand," he said slowly. "This cannot become precedent. We cannot permit chaos, even born of good intentions." Lucas nodded once. "I do understand, Your Eminence, and I would make the same choice again." A shadow of a smile flickered across Tremblay's lips, gone almost before it could be certain. After a long pause, Favreau spoke again. "There will be no formal charges, but practical adjustments must be made. You will no longer serve in visible, ceremonial posts." Lucas accepted the decision without bitterness, for he knew, in the quiet, unshakable place inside him, that he had not betrayed the Guard's highest purpose. He had fulfilled it, and somewhere, he believed, Pope Francis would be smiling. 3 days later, before the sun had even broken, the Vatican skyline, Lucas Bowman found a simple envelope slid beneath his door. No grand announcement, no formal ceremony. Just a quiet, bureaucratic note sealed with the insignia of the Secretary of State. It read, "Effective immediately, Guard Bowman is reassigned to the Apostolic Archives, Security Division." The Apostolic Archives, the ancient, sprawling labyrinth, buried beneath Vatican City, was a world away from the public eye. It was where history lived in silence, hidden from pilgrims, cameras, and noise. Lucas understood the message behind the transfer. He was not being punished, but he was being tucked away, respectfully removed from view. Without complaint, he packed his belongings. The polished ceremonial uniform with its proud stripes was carefully folded and replaced by the plain black attire of the Archives guards. No more halberd, no more parade ground drills. Only shadowed, halls, endless shelves of parchment, and the quiet breath of history. Monsignor Deza, the Archives' stoic supervisor, welcomed him with a nod and a few short instructions. "You'll patrol the outer corridors," he said, his voice as dry as the parchment surrounding them. "No cameras, no pens, only pencils and no questions." Lucas nodded. He didn't need explanations. The silence was the explanation. Weeks passed, measured not by sunlight but by the steady ticking of unseen clocks and the musty scent of aged paper. News from above trickled down. A new conclave was underway. Rumors whispered of who might become the next pope. But deep in the archives, such concerns floated past like leaves on a river. Down here, time itself seemed different. Slower, heavier, more deliberate. Yet something inside Lucas was changing too. Each night, after his rounds, he would sit alone in one of the archive's forgotten corners, staring at ancient manuscripts penned by hands long turned to dust. Letters written by saints, by heretics, by lost kings and anonymous scribes. They spoke of faith, of fear, of rebellion and redemption. They told a different story of tradition, not as unbending law, but as a living dialogue across centuries. For the first time in his life, Lucas understood. Tradition was never meant to be a prison. It was a river, strong, wide, and enduring, but still capable of bending when the terrain demanded it. One afternoon, while crossing the Vatican gardens between patrols, Lucas encountered a group of school children on a tour. One boy, older than 10, stared at him with wide eyes. "You're the guard who moved at the funeral, aren't you?" he asked in halting Italian. Lucas smiled faintly, the first real smile in weeks. He knelt to the boy's level and said quietly, "Sometimes standing still takes courage, but sometimes moving does too." The boy grinned, then ran back to his group, his laughter lifting into the Roman sky. And for the first time since the funeral, Lucas felt at peace, not because he had obeyed, not because he had rebelled, but because he had listened to the voice that mattered most, the one deep inside. As we reach the end of today's story, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Lucas Bowman's position? Would you have stood still, honoring the letter of tradition, or would you have dared to move, honoring its spirit instead? We would love to hear where you are watching from too. It amazes us how stories of courage and quiet defiance can connect people across the world, no matter the distance between us. And if this story touched you, if it made you think differently about loyalty, duty, or what true honor means, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. Tomorrow we will bring you another powerful story, one that might shift the way you see the unseen moments around you. Your voice matters here. Your reflections help build a community where tradition and compassion can exist side by side, just as they should. We can't wait to read your thoughts.